because that's the problem I had with the other two I ordered and sent back, was they didn't have any volume control and it was overdriving, so it was hard to understand. So we'll try this one. Maybe the third time is the charm. So we're going to be in Ezekiel, Daniel, some places like that today, because I want you to see that there's a lot of stuff besides Revelation that speaks to this time period. Revelation is the clearest and has the most detail, but at the same time, there's prophecies in Daniel and Ezekiel all over the Bible that deal with the last days and give us different perspectives and different pieces of information. Now, each of you should have, where you're sitting, a copy of this. So Bev asked me to make copies, and I thought that was a good idea, so you have one you can look at, because I know with a lot of this small print, it's probably not the easiest in the world to see. And I wanted to start out with this to kind of go back through this. This is the overall timeline that we find in the book of Daniel, where the angel comes to Daniel and says, there are 70 weeks decreed for your people. And that means 490 years. It's weeks of years, weeks of 7 years, which is very common in prophecy. You'll find that just like the final week of the tribulation is 7 years. And what this, couple of things this tells you is, number one, the most important thing in the historical record, the physical historical record of earth, is Israel. That's what it's all about. Israel is God's kingdom on earth. We are his spiritual kingdom, not the kingdom on earth. And a lot of people get that mixed up. I mean, even Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this earth. It's a spiritual kingdom. And so therefore, Israel still has enormous importance, and all of history is geared around what will happen with Israel. That's why the whole world focuses on Israel. Even though they don't know that's why they're focused on Israel, and yet look at the news and stuff, how often are we focused on this little tiny country that's the size of Rhode Island, over there in the Middle East. And what he was telling Daniel was all of this stuff that Daniel was told came after Daniel. It was prophesying the future, both the relatively near future and the very far future, because during this time, Daniel was living in the kingdom of the Persians. So they've already made it through the Babylonians and into the Persians, and yet the stuff that's to come, Romans, Greeks, all that, is the middle future, and then the far future would be the end of the age, which would be the tribulation. And he's told there's 490 years. 483 of those years played out up to not the death of Christ, but when Christ rides into Jerusalem. Because the prophecy we looked at last week said that when Jerusalem says that this man is their king, that is the end of the 483 years. And then from there on comes a period that's called the indeterminate period. We call it the church age. That's us, the Gentiles. It's also called the Gentile age or the church age. Because what's the church made up of? Gentiles. By far, Jews are a very, very tiny minority within the church. And the church age is an indeterminate period. And so we have no idea how long it will last. So far, it's lasted 2,023 years approximately. And who knows? It may go another 1,000 years. It might not go another year. It's really hard to say, because most of the prophecies in the Bible leading up to the rapture and the return of Christ, the tribulation, have been fulfilled. There's very little that has to be fulfilled in order for it to happen. But it's been that way for a while, so it's hard to say. But as we look out in the world, it sure looks like it's really close, because we're starting to see some things that are very detailed that are in the prophecies that many people wondered how it would happen. Good would be considered evil. How was that going to happen? Well, it's already happened. The police are the bad guys and the criminals are the good guys all of a sudden. It's like, huh? How did that happen? That's one of the things. The Great Delusion, which we're going to talk about today, I think that's happening, more so than at any time in the past. And so what happens is the 483 years, the prophecy of Israel stops here. Then this indeterminate period, and then it picks up again with the beginning of the tribulation. That's the last 7 years to make the 490 that brings us down to the end of man and Satan's rule of the earth and the millennial kingdom of Christ. That's the last 1,000 years, at which comes the end, which down here at the very end, that's when God completely destroys all of creation and creates it anew like it was originally. Perfect. No sin, no Satan, no none of that. And that's where we live forever. is in the new creation, the new heaven, the new earth, and the new cosmos. So, all right, now let's see what I got here. Oh, I forgot about these as we work our way through.
Was it before sin?
What's that?
How was the earth before sin?
Before sin, the earth was perfection. Perfection. There were no thorns, there were no thistles, there were no unwanted plants, there were no allergies, there were no mosquitoes. Or at least if there were, they ate something else. That type of thing.
Then man came.
Then, well, no, man was on the earth. It wasn't until man sinned. When sin came, we have no idea. The Bible doesn't say. It says God created man, and then at some point, Adam and Eve sinned. So it could have been 100 years, 1,000 years, could have been 5,000 years. We don't really know. Deb?
Okay, under church age, it says great parentheses.
It says what?
The great parentheses, what's that?
Let me see I don't want to pull the slide back up again. Under the church age, it says,
Great parentheses.
they call it the great parenthesis because it's the period in parentheses in between the prophecies of Israel. Like a parenthesis is always a secondary thought in a sentence. It's a secondary period in time. So it's called, some people will use that term, the great parenthesis. Yeah, it's not used very commonly. So, all right, where are we? Now, Ezekiel prophesied between 593 and 571 BC. And always remember with BC, you always count time backwards because it starts at 1 with the birth of Christ and goes that way and back in time. So it's 593 to 571 BC. And we're going to look at one of his prophecies here. He says, and I will vindicate the holiness of my great name, this is God speaking, which has been profaned among the nations and which you have profaned among them. That's an understatement. Isn't it funny how the name of God became a universal curse word? You know, nobody uses Muhammad as a curse word or Allah as a curse word. In fact, what would happen if you did? You'd get killed, absolutely. Again, should convince people that God is who he says he is, that there's God and there's Satan, and that's why these things happen. Because how do you explain that? Why would you grab this particular religion and make its words curse words? Only Satan would want to do that. Not Buddha, not Allah, nobody else, just Christianity. Interesting. Okay? And the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the Lord God, when through you I vindicate my holiness before their eyes. The important part is, most important part of this passage is verse 24. I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the countries and bring you into your own land. So this is where God prophesied way back in time that when Israel would be taken out of the land, that's other prophecies, but then God says there will come a day when I will bring you back and give you back the land. And from 721 BC, which is when the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, and then in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the southern country of Judah, leveled Jerusalem and the temple. From that time until 1948, Israel was under someone else's rule. There were Jews in the land, but they did not have control of the land. The Syrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the English, all these different people had control of the land. And against all odds, there is no way politically, logically, or rationally that Israel should have gotten the land back in 1948. But they did. They got their land back, and then God started calling Jews from all across the world to come back into Israel. And they did. They came. Just like God prophesied here. Now see, what I find interesting is many skeptics will say there are no prophecies in the Bible. What happened was they wrote those after the fact so they could be super accurate and then pretended that they happened before. Yet there's an enormous amount of evidence that says that's not true. One of the pieces of evidence is that ancient Hebrew is very different than Hebrew down through other periods. And so if they wrote it at some much later period to try to make it look like it was a prophecy, it wouldn't have been written in the ancient Hebrew because it disappeared. Nobody knew it, yet it's written in ancient Hebrew. So linguistically we find that. Then here, you can't say this happened after the fact. It didn't happen until 1948. And this prophecy was made back in the 500s BC. And so again, and you cannot say, oh, it didn't happen. Well, you can go to Israel and there it is. You know, it's overwhelmingly true and shows us that God's prophecies are true. And he has multiple places in the Old Testament where he prophesies a day is coming when he will draw his people. And notice even in this, it says from among the nations, meaning they'll be scattered where? All over. And where are the Jews scattered? All over. Absolutely. And where are they coming from back to Israel? Everywhere. Europe, Asia, everywhere. So exactly as it was. See, God always gives us detail so we can always verify what he says. If you look at these other prophecies by people like Gene Dixon and Nostradamus and stuff, they're always super vague. It's like something really big's going to happen at some time in the future. And then something really big happens. Everybody goes, oh, look, their prophecies are true. It's like, really? I think I could have got that one. You know, and they're very, very vague and don't have any detail. That's a big difference between God's prophecies and all these others. God's has extreme detail in them. And so some so detailed, that's why they got the idea they were written after the fact. Because all these skeptics said there's no way they could know that detail. Well, they could if God told them. Like in Daniel chapter 11 and places like that. So Israel was given back their land. There's other prophecies that also say that Israel will bloom and produce food. And even be the envy of other nations. Well, that's true today. I think it's going to happen even more so in the future, but it's true today. Their land is mostly like Arizona, except for the coastal areas. It's mostly dry, like here, with very little rain. And yet, that's what much of Israel looks like. That was land that was like our land before Israel got in there. These, by the way, are fish ponds. They grow fish as well as all forms of agriculture. It says that there will be great cities, and continuing on even in this prophecy in Ezekiel, there'll be cities filled with people, and the land will bloom and produce great amounts of food. And so we find that today. Israel is densely populated with many large cities. In fact, it's kind of hard sometimes to tell when you leave one and go into another because it is such a small place and so densely populated. And then at the same time, Israel was able to turn it into a place that they grow not only enough food to feed their entire nation, but they export that food to other nations. By the way, they also feed Hamas and other places. Their food comes from Israel, not from their own farms and such. Their electricity comes from Israel. Their water comes from Israel. Yeah. And yet how evil Israel is. They treat them so bad. Really? They provide them with food, water, electricity. That without Israel, they should have cut them off and said, you want the Gaza Strip? Have the Gaza Strip, but build your own power plants. Grow your own food. Drill your own wells. It's your country. But they didn't. They still provide them with all that. Well, they've already cut a lot of it off. You know, but the thing is, they're always up against that hard thing of the innocent civilians who suffer. Which, of course, the world picks up and condemns Israel. Not for the people that attacked them, but the innocent Jews that have died. You know, they don't ever cover that part.
Those innocent civilians joined the army to fight Israel.
Yeah, oh yeah. Emily?
When Israel has prisoners, they take really good care of them.
Oh, yeah.
Feed them, and now they're begging the Hamas that the people they kidnap to get them insulin and take care of their medical needs.
Right. Right. And the comment was that Israel takes very good care of their prisoners, whereas Hamas doesn't. They could care less. And don't feed them, don't take care of them, don't give them medical care, none of that. So, all right. And so Israel we see is growing. Do you know that a huge portion of the cut flowers that Europe has comes from Israel? That's one of their products that is known throughout the world. They grow the biggest, most beautiful cut flowers in the world and have enormous fields of them. They invented drip irrigation. The reason we can grow stuff in Arizona and other parts of the Southwest is strictly because Israel invented drip irrigation. And they are the masters of irrigation across the world. Nobody can do like Israel can. Do you know when they gave the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians? That they had some of their largest fully automated greenhouses were in the Gaza Strip that produced enormous amounts of food. And they were completely automated, and they're inside buildings where they had, you know, hydroponics style growing, that type of stuff, so it could be grown year round. And it was computerized, the most advanced in the world, where there were virtually no people involved in what happened there, other than maintaining the equipment, stuff like that. What did the Palestinians do the day they got it? They burn them to the ground. Why? Because the Jews touched them. They burnt them to the ground and then turned around and screamed that they were starving and it was Israel's fault. And so Israel provides them with food. And yet Hamas is on the same land and they can't grow anything. The people in the West Bank are on the same land and they don't grow anything. And the nations around them, Jordan and others that are on very similar property, grow very little. They import most of their food. Who's the only one that grows the food? Israel. And they grow it in enormous amounts. And they grow everything. Grains, citrus, produce, flowers, all of that. They grow with very limited water resources. They are the masters of irrigation. Now their new thing, well, it's not new, I saw this probably 10 or 15 years ago, was that not only do they use drip irrigation, but they put these plastic domes over each plant so that when the water evaporates, it condenses on the inside of the dome and drops back into the ground again, not into the air, and that helps cut down on the amount of water that they need to water their plants with. And they're planting millions of trees. You see Saudi Arabia, Jordan, anybody else planting trees? Nope. And they have tons of money from the oil. Not Jordan, but Saudi Arabia does. And other nations, Iran, Iraq, those nations. So we see that happening. And then, we started out a long time ago when I first started going back to Revelation, was in 2 Thessalonians. Because this to me is the trigger that was one of the last things that I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work out, that I think tells us we're very close to we're in the last days. The last days, biblically speaking, when you see any passage in the Bible that says in the last days, that began the day Jesus was crucified on the cross. We live in the last days. It's just we live in that church age, which we don't know how long it's going to be. It's an indeterminate period. But we're getting pretty close, I think, to the tribulation and the rapture. So look at 2 Thessalonians. I told you before, this gives us kind of a rough, very quick overview of what's the main things that are going to happen during the tribulation, some of the main points. The detail then is found in Revelation and Daniel and Ezekiel. It says, now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way. So what was happening was there were skeptics and evil people, agitators that were out there sending letters in the name of the apostles saying the rapture's already come and you got left behind, basically, is what they were saying. And so the people were freaking out. They were also saying things about how the dead would not be part of the rapture, because you'll see he covers that as well in another part. So they had to send out this letter saying it hasn't happened. None of this is from us. Does this kind of sound like today when you get all this stuff on the internet, and they tell you don't answer this scam, don't answer that scam, that it's the very same thing, they just didn't have the internet. They were spreading it by mouth. And yet they had to send this letter out. If you'll notice when you read the New Testament, most of the letters that were sent by Paul and Peter are trying to deal with problems in the church. We always think the problems in the church started in our time. No, they've been there since the very beginning. And most of the letters are written to undo bad theology and problems in the church, and fix it up. Even Revelation, when we get there, is about that in the beginning, in the first 4 chapters. So then he goes on, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first. So we know that has to happen, the rebellion. Now, who's the rebellion? Who would that be against? God. Yeah, not a rebellion against a king, it's against God. A total rebellion across the world against God. Let's see. And the man of lawlessness is revealed. The next thing that has to happen. We call him the Antichrist. He's also the beast in the second half. But that's the man of lawlessness. Lawless meaning he has no intention, desire of any kind to follow any of God's laws. He's going to break them all. He wants nothing to do with any of them. He is totally lawless. Okay? He's also called the son of destruction because he brings destruction to the entire earth. Who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. So this guy is so arrogant. Well, number one, what do we know? He's going to take his seat in the temple. Today, what about the temple today? There is no temple. So we know that the temple has to be rebuilt between now and then because there's no place for him to take a seat. Now, we don't know whether it will be rebuilt prior to the start of the tribulation or at the very beginning. It's possible it's at the very beginning of the tribulation because that's when the Antichrist makes the peace treaty with Israel. And part of that peace treaty might be giving them back the Temple Mount where they can build the temple. Or it could occur before then. Who knows? And then verse 5 it says, do you not remember that when I was still with you I told you these things? See, Paul had already taught them this, but yet they were thrown for a loop by these letters going around and these people saying they were speaking in the apostles' names. And you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, meaning even in his day, Paul is telling us people are already pulling away from and rebelling against God, even the Jews. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. So the lawlessness one's going to make all kinds of noise, kill all kinds of people, get the whole world gathered together in a world global economy and political system, and the Bible says it's all going to come to nothing. Because Jesus is going to show up and he's going to speak. No weaponry, just speak. The Antichrist is going to die, and all of his military is going to die. In fact, all the people in the world that aren't Christians are going to die. And then comes the millennial kingdom. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan. So we're even told exactly who's behind all this and empowering him. With all power and false signs and wonders. So the man will have the backing of Satan and have Satan's power at his disposal and be able to do signs and wonders. And that's why I tell Christians all the time, be very, 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 very careful when somebody starts telling you about signs and wonders. They're not all from God. Most Christians think all miracles are from God. No, they're not. There's lots of them that are not from God because Satan can mimic everything except bringing someone back to life. He can give you death, but he cannot give you life. Only God can do that. But he can do everything else. And with all wicked deception. So here we begin. For those who are perishing, meaning those who are unsaved, they're already perishing. Because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. And see how it combines it together. In order to be saved, you have to love the truth. In order to love the truth, you have to know the truth. And so it's that process of knowing it, loving it, and giving your life to Christ, because that's believing it. And that's the people. The only people who will not fall for the deception are those who read and know the Bible, particularly the book of Revelation. It's also why, remember, I started Revelation a while back and we read where it says, blessed are those who are taught it and those who read it out loud and those who live according to it. Well, this is partially why. It's that fact that keeps those people from getting sucked into the kingdom of the Antichrist is by knowing the word, reading, knowing, and believing it. And verse 11 is the one that really got me going on this. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion. Not just a delusion, but a strong delusion. And remember, the Bible has a tremendous ability of understatement. So this is going to be a really overwhelming delusion that people will accept. So that they may believe what is false. In order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And that last one also gives us a lot of insight. Pleasure in doing the opposite of what God wants. That's unrighteousness. And just think of our world today. Do more people get pleasure out of abiding by the laws of the Bible? Or do they look to go out and do things that are the opposite of the Bible? So see, we're already in that period where it's become the mentality of our nation, at least, and even across the world, that the Bible is going to keep us from having fun. So we're going to throw it away and we're going to go out and do what we want. Here, that started in the 60s and 70s with the hippie movement and all that stuff. That's also when we walked away from the Bible, took prayer out of school, and our country became anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-the Bible. And that's where we are now in most cases. In many communities, they consider churches and Christians to be a blight on the area, not an advantage. We're the bad guys. That type of thing. Because we're stuck on one truth that's the only thing that's true, and that makes us the bad guys. Which is funny, that's the definition of truth. This thing is true and that's it. But yet the world wants to say there is no truth. So,
Which is kind of like they teach that.
absolutely. Absolutely. The anti-Christianity is taught from preschool to college, all through it. Evolution, they do meditation, Asian mystic religion meditation. They teach that to kids in preschool. Visualization, that's part of the New Age belief system. All of that. Larry?
So the Antichrist proclaims to be God.
He does.
And then in verse 11, it says, so God will fool them completely. That means the Antichrist proclaims to be God. But he will fool them completely.
And that the whole world will worship him as God, except the Christians.
Will that be a physical person or an
Yeah.
idea?
No, it's a physical person known as the Antichrist. But yeah, in the first 3.5 years, he's the man of peace. He allows people to worship as they want to, but he creates a one world religion that I believe will be some version of New Age because it accepts everything. The only thing he won't allow is Judaism. Well, he'll allow Judaism, but not Christianity. We'll be hunted from the very beginning of the tribulation because that's one thing that the New Age and these other religions won't accept is when we say there is one God, one way to that God, and this is it. And that's what they won't put up with. All roads lead to God. You've heard that one, haven't you? Which I find is interesting because there are such divergent beliefs of what heaven and God is there's no way they could all lead to the same place. I mean, come on, for a Muslim, it's 72 virgins, And for Christians, it's something totally different. And for Buddhists, it's something totally different. They can't all be the same place. Some of these are diametrically opposed to each other. It's impossible logically,
I just find that, what does verse 11 say?
Verse 11 in here, therefore God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false.
I find that confusing and unusual that they, instead of saying Antichrist,
Gives them the delusion. Well, you got to remember who's ultimately in control of everything. God is. So if they believe a delusion, it's because God allowed it. But in this case, he's going to send it. But what he says is, if you're a lover of the truth, you won't fall for the delusion. This is only the people that are already against God that fall for it. He just puts it out there. He doesn't make them believe it. He just puts it out there. And they accept it. Because it's not the truth, which is the Bible, which they've already said they don't want. It's not like he forces them to believe it. He just puts it out there, this delusion, and they believe it. They choose to believe it. But anyone who'll read the Bible will clearly see it's not true. Or, really, if you even look out in reality, you'll clearly see it's not true. But that's why it's a delusion.
Everybody has a choice.
Oh, yeah, sure. And any of those people can give their lives to Christ at any time during that period. And they won't believe in the delusion anymore. They'll see the truth because that's how you come to Christ. So, but just remember, this is God's plan. It's been God's plan since the beginning. He's going to allow certain things. He's going to cause certain things. But he doesn't force anybody to believe anything. He just puts it out there and they go and accept it. Because eventually the whole world does worship this. Well, most of the world, not the whole world, does worship him as God. Because when you get to the second half of the tribulation, you get the false prophet, you get the statue that comes to life. There's all these supernatural things that happen that make people believe he does have the power of God. A God, perhaps. So,
Could it be AI?
well, that might be involved in it. What, Larry?
so my question goes back, why did God allow Satan to roam the earth?
It really all comes back to the point of love. In order to love, you have to have the choice not to love, or it's meaningless. You have to be able to choose to love God or choose not to love God. So there has to be another choice besides God. Satan is that other choice. There has to be good and there has to be evil in order for us to choose good. If God made us robots that just loved him because he made us, that's meaningless. He wants people who love him because they want to love him, and it's their choice. It's no different than, if somebody forced your wife to love you and you knew that they were forcing her, she didn't have a choice, it wouldn't mean very much. It means a lot because she chose you. That's why. And it's the same with God. There has to be that light and dark, good and evil, a choice that has to be made. It's why God allowed Satan to roam the earth and to, tempt humanity. So that we have the choice to choose God or to choose Satan. Is really what it comes down to, Harry.
In the end, good will outdo the evil too.
Well, God always wins, yes. Yes, that's the point of all the prophecies. Right. That's the point of all the prophecies, to tell us what this one just told us, that the man of lawlessness is going to look all powerful, but he's going to come to nothing. And when Jesus returns, he doesn't even fight him. He just speaks. And the guy disappears. He's dead, whatever the case may be. But that's how it happens there. So I got to go back. I didn't repeat your question for the people on the internet. So the question that Larry asked was, he was asking about verse 11 in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, because it says that God sends them a strong delusion, not the Antichrist. And so that's what we were talking about, why God sends this delusion. But the main point is no one is forced to accept the delusion. They choose to do so. So did you have your hand up, Gloria?
So we said earlier that only God can give life, but when the Antichrist, doesn't he get a fatal wound?
He gets a wound that appears fatal. So, and what she asked, what was just asked, was that Satan cannot create life, cannot give life. And that the Antichrist has a fatal wound and comes back. It says he appears to die. And we can do that today. We can make it to where, without sophisticated equipment, you cannot tell someone is still alive. Because their breathing and their heart rate are so shallow. Type of thing. And so again, what you see is Satan is trying to mimic what God did. Jesus was killed on the cross. He came back to life. So he's going to try to mimic that with his person. And that's really what the tribulation is. I call it the battle of the sons. Because it's Jesus and the Antichrist. Satan's still in the background. It's not till the end of the tribulation, well actually the end of the 1,000-year reign of Christ, that's when the dads duke it out. That's between Satan and God. Whereas this is between the sons. Now, of course, the Antichrist has no chance, and Satan has no chance, but yet that's what it is. It's the battle of the sons, then it's the battle of the fathers at the very end. And I love the part where it talks about, because it talks about Satan is released from the abyss after 1,000 years, and he goes out and he gathers an army of uncountable numbers to attack Christ, who's in the city of Jerusalem. And it says that God doesn't even get up from his throne. He just calls down fire from heaven and wipes them all out, and they're done. So God doesn't even get up and fight. He just says, that's it, you're done. And that's it. There's no battle. He just destroys them all, and they go into the pit of fire, the lake of fire. That's it. That's why I don't really like the term like battle, because there's no battle. When Jesus returns, there's no battle. He just slaughters everybody. When the end of the millennial kingdom, when it's between God and Satan, there's no battle. He doesn't even get up from his easy chair. He just slaughters them all. That's it, because he has total power. And in much of them, even in a lot of the church, and definitely out in the world, people have this sense that good and evil are these equal powers. Because that's what we see. In fact, what we see generally is evil tends to be stronger in so many cases, because evil's not bound by any rules. Whereas good is. You think of the police and all that, they're bound by all these rules. The bad guys aren't. They can do whatever they want, that type of thing. And so it looks that way, but there is no competition. Satan has no chance, none, zero. He has no power compared to God. In fact, the only power he has is what God gives him. That's it. God could take it away at any time he chose to. But yet, he lets it play out on the earth. So, all right, where am I? Now, do you notice in chapter 2 of Thessalonians, in the first verse, it says, are being gathered together to him. That's one of the verses we believe refers to the rapture. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. That we be gathered to Christ during that time. Now also, I'm trying to remember, it seems like I'm getting ahead of my notes here. Yeah. Okay. First, there is the rebellion against God and righteousness. I think we're at the beginning or maybe even the middle of that. Most of the world is turning against moral codes and laws. See, where do all moral codes come from? From God, absolutely. Mostly from His Word, and then disseminated out through other people. But think of it. If you believe in evolution, that man evolved from a common ancestor of the ape, okay? How would we evolve morals? It's impossible. It cannot happen. It's not our nature. We hate them. We fight against them. Look at raising our kids. What do we have to do? We had to fight like mad to get our kids to learn morals and constraints and so on and so forth, because it's not their nature. I always say, if you want to understand humanity, you don't need a psychiatrist. You don't need to study millions of people. You just need to go sit in a preschool room. You'll understand everything there is to know about humanity because they have no inhibitions. Everything in the room is theirs. Doesn't matter they didn't buy it. And every kid in the room thinks everything in the room is theirs. That type of thing. And they're selfish, and on and on and on it goes, And so you'll understand clearly about who humanity is.
But at that age, they're adorable.
They're that too. When you don't want to kill them, they're adorable. So, well, what's interesting is, even back in the ancient empires, they tended to have some type of moral code. But in today's world, it's getting to be where there is no such thing. What do they say in America? But it's also in Asia and much of the world. The mantra now is there's no such thing as truth. Because you see, if there's nothing's true, then nothing's ethical and nothing's moral. It doesn't exist. There have to be some morals and ethics that apply to everybody on the planet in order for that to happen. That has to have truth. And so how do we get rid of that? We say, aha, there's no such thing as anything that's true. That type of thing.
Maybe this is getting out there, but could the Antichrist ever be AI?
No, the Antichrist, I was asked if he could be AI. He might use AI, but the Antichrist is a person. The Bible's extremely clear that it's a man, a person. Comes from the east, rises to power, he's charismatic, he's a man of peace, he's a world leader, all those kinds of things. It's very likely all technology will be a part of that, but not just AI by itself, no. There'll be a man, and then that man turns into the beast after he receives the apparently fatal wound that's not really a fatal wound.
It's like not the beast, but he turns into.
He's the Antichrist for the first 3.5 years, the man of peace. He's the beast for the last 3.5 years, the man of death, destruction, and I'm God and you all have to worship me. That all changes at that 3.5 year mark where he gets the fatal wound, or what appears to be a fatal wound, and comes back to life again. Okay, some signs of this rebellion that we're dealing with that's in here. This is the first time I know of in history where sex is a total recreational activity. There's been a lot of promiscuousness and whatnot all through time. What's funny is to read the Victorian era, read stuff about that where everybody seemed to be so prudish, and then in the background you find out everybody's having sex with everybody, while pretending to be prudish up front, And I told you before, the part that always amazes me is you can't see a woman's ankles. Oh my gosh, that's immoral. But she can wear a top that's cut down almost to her waist, and that's fine. You're like, how do we get to ankles being the, big deal? But yet, that was it, And now, in our day, if you go out there and look, sex is just something you do to have fun. With your friends, with your step siblings that you're not directly related to, with, whoever happens to be there. And if it's a male, if it's a female, doesn't matter. There are very few true homosexuals in this world. They're almost all bisexual. It's just sex with whoever, happens to be there. Never in history have we had that kind of thing going on. And that it's considered normal. Stuff like this has gone on in the past at some level, but never accepted as a normal. In fact, right now, if you're a young man or young woman that says, I won't have sex till I'm married, you're an outcast. You're an oddball. You're a weirdo. Those kinds of things. And you put up with enormous pressure, to participate, which I've always thought was funny. To me, that's another way to know that evil and stuff was created by like Satan, because isn't it funny that people who do evil want you to do it? And they'll go crazy trying to get you to do it.
Right.
You know, when I was a kid, I didn't drink. I would go out with friends that did. They would spend the whole night trying to get me to drink. You know, and I'm like, what do you care? But you see, I think we all inherently deep down have that part of God in us that says this is not right. That's why we want everybody to participate, because then I don't feel bad. But if there's one person that can resist, I can't say, God, this is how you made me. I don't have a choice. Because see, if there's someone who doesn't drink, then that takes that and blows it out of the water. You do have a choice. They did it. Why can't you? See, it's no different.
I think what you just mentioned, sex is recreation activity, and if male or female doesn't subscribe to that, then they're an outcast. But don't you think they're an outcast because it makes others who are doing this feel guilty?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, Larry just said, or they treat us that way because it makes them feel guilty. Absolutely. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, that like when we were younger, Debbie had a really good friend that lived behind us. Married, had kids, great. We're great friends. In fact, we put a gate in the fence between us. We watched their kids, they watched our kids, all that. They weren't Christians though, okay? Then Debbie and her, these really good friends, they talk all the time, and then they get a divorce. And then all of a sudden, she won't talk to Debbie anymore, wants nothing to do with her. Why? Because Debbie's not divorced. She feels guilty about it, you see. And so, doesn't want to talk to her. And you see that happen all the time with Christians and non-Christians with things. They don't want you around anymore because it makes them feel bad. Why do they feel bad? Because deep down inside, they know that what they did wasn't right. And and that's why they want everybody to participate. That type of thing. But yeah, I could remember people just going crazy trying to get me to drink. And I would usually tell them, you know what? So we're going to go out. We're all going to have fun, but I'm the only one that'll remember. You won't have any idea whether you had fun or not. You're going to have to ask me. And because I don't drink and all that stuff, my parents let me go where I want, do what I want, stay out as late as I want. I have no restrictions because they know I'm not going to get in trouble. So you're telling me to do what you do is better? I don't think so. Not only that, you're going to be puking your guts out, have a hangover. I'm not. So now explain to me the advantage, type of thing. Eventually they'd leave me alone.
You'll have money and they're broke.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, let's see. What else do we have? Everything is someone else's fault. How about that? I don't know of a time in history where people would not take personal responsibility. In fact, up until very recently, that was like the number one thing that people did that made you who you were, was you took responsibility for your choices. Your word was your bond. You'd never break your word. Your choices were yours, and you dealt with the consequences. Now, we're all victims. Everybody's a victim. And there's nothing you can do about your situation. I don't know if you've noticed that's part of that. There's nothing you can do about your situation. Oh, yes, there is, but they've been convinced that they can't. And that way the governments and those in power get control over you because they have to come in and fix your situation. If you don't have any money, instead of having to get a job, you could fix your own situation. No. We'll give you welfare and food stamps and a place to live, and on it goes. We see it over and over. How about any form of discipline is evil? Didn't that pretty much permeate at least the United States? Any form of discipline is evil. Let kids do what they want. They're only kids for a short time. It's like, no, you don't understand. We're raising adults here, not kids, and they need to learn that from a very young age. Trying to learn to be an adult when you're 50 and your mom and dad are dead is a lot harder than when you're 15 and they're there to support you. But that's why we have so many men that are still boys in men's bodies, because they weren't disciplined. They didn't have to learn. See, everybody thinks discipline is punishment. It's not. Discipline is training you to do what's right. It's very different than punishment. That's why in the New Testament, God says, I discipline those I love. And it's true in the physical world. You don't love your kid if you don't discipline them, because you're going to give them a miserable life. Miserable life. And if we love them enough to discipline, because is it hard to discipline? In many cases it is. I don't like whooping my kids and stuff like that. but yet we have to do it. We have to restrict them to make them internalize good and bad, morals and ethics. That's the whole point that we're after, is that they'll do what's right because it's right, not because they're made to. You know, that type of thing. Michael?
This brings up a memory of when I was in basic training boot camp. It was like the sergeant said, okay, we're going to walk, whatever it was, 10, 20 miles, both ways, whatever. And my boots were too tight, right? I just really knew. And I said, no, my boots are too tight, right? And this comes up a lot lately. And he says, I don't care. Just forget about it. Just go. Come back. Let me know how you did, right? And after when I got back, I completely forgot that my boots didn't fit.
Yeah.
It was, and, you know, and that's coming back a lot lately. It's like, discipline is good, you know? It's like,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And isn't it funny that when we talk about things, you know, it's on the heart of every American, and people call it, well, sports. What's the most important thing in sports? Discipline. But I mean, how do you win? Discipline. That's how. You operate as a team. How do armies win? Discipline. That's how they win. You operate as a team. And yet, when it comes to the rest of life, the world says, no, we never teach discipline. You know, go to a school, go to a public school. They have absolutely no avenue of discipline left, none, except to kick you out of school. That's all they have left. They can't spank, they can't do anything, because nothing's anybody's fault. You know, like when I was a kid, my dad used to scare my teachers, because he'd come in and say, now look, he gives you any trouble, you whoop the tar out of him. You send me a note home, I guarantee you he'll never do it again. That scared my teachers to death. They thought he was going to kill me, you know, or something like that. I even had teachers, well, I'm not going to tell your dad because I'm afraid he, you know. I'm like, boy, are you stupid, but I didn't say it, you know. But nonetheless, you know, that's how it was. Parents supported the teachers. Now what happens? Well, if you were to spank little Johnny, buddy, you're going to jail, and you're going to be sued, and they're going to take every penny you have because you hurt his ego, and, you know, it's like his ego needs to be hurt, you know. Emily?
I just find it funny that people don't want God to tell them what to do, but the young people in this world want socialism. You know,
They don't understand that that's somebody telling you what to do. Yeah, you know, we just had, Emily made the comment of people don't want God to tell them what to do, but people are so caught up in communism and socialism, which that's exactly what both are, is some overarching committee tells you what job you will work, when you will work it, how much you will get paid, all that. See, I don't think any of these people that support that stuff have any idea of how that works out in real life. Because you will not find a single person raised under communism who, when put into a free society, will tell you that was better. Look at the Soviet Union. They were all starving. Look at China. They are all a third world economy till what they do. They switched their economy to capitalism. They maintained a political system of communism, but their economy is capitalism. Now they have some of the most millionaires in the world. In a very short period of time. Millionaires. Asia is filled with millionaires and billionaires because they switched to a capitalist economy. The only one that works, and by the way, the one God gave us in the Bible. He gave us really severe capitalism with some of the most controls and constraints of anything you'll ever find. Our problem is we apply capitalism without God's controls, and that's why it gets out of hand. God's controls were every 7 years, all debts are forgiven. Okay, that means you can't create a country and a people that are horribly loaded down with debt, because that's where capitalism leads. You know, every 50 years in Israel, all the land, no matter who bought it, goes back to the original owner, period. You cannot amass an empire. It's impossible, because every 50 years, all that land you own goes back to the original owners, and on it goes. I'm glad Debbie pointed up. I'm too caught up in what I'm teaching here. It's a minute after. So, we made it from page 3 to page 4 of my notes. So, now you know why it takes 18 months to 2 years to teach the book of Revelation, because I'm not even in Revelation yet. But it covers so much of life.